Does your shirt say Erica? Oh, never mind. We're live now. Good evening, afternoon, whatever we are, everybody. We're all confused. It was a late night in the Capitol. Thanks so much for having you. I'm Congressman Sean Casten, here with my friends and teachers, Erica Bray Parker, Rebecca Gamboa, and David Goldberg, who cover sort of all parts of our education spectrum from elementary to high school to community college. And we're here to celebrate American Educators Week, not just the teachers we have here, but all the people who make the schools work. From the folks who are dealing with security in the building, and the janitors and the bus drivers and the nurses and everybody who keeps it going. Thank you all so much for what you do. Especially, always thank you, but especially in this COVID year that's been so disruptive of almost every piece of that equation. And I can't thank you enough, both as in my capacity as a member of Congress, trying to make sure that we got resources into communities, and then all of a sudden finding that schools were helping people get Wi-Fi access or getting school lunches out to people who didn't have aid. But also as a parent who has seen my own kids go through and manage just all the exceptional ways that you've managed a very difficult year. So thank you. When I go around, we'll do a little bit of conversations. I'm here to learn from you. Hopefully answer some questions that you all have about some fairly consequential legislation we've done in the last 24 hours and beyond. But let me shut up at this point and turn it over to Erica Bray Parker for a little bit of introduction.
Thanks so much for hosting us. I think this is a great way to end National Education Week. My name is Erica Bray Parker. I'm a high school social studies teacher. I've been teaching for 28 years. I am up in the Glenbard district in Carroll Stream. And I'm also a mom of two boys that we raised, and I don't know if pushed is the right word, but we pushed through the Wheaton-Warrenville School District. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
And Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Gamboa. I'm a fifth grade teacher in Lombard. This is my 26th year, 25th, 26th, 27th, somewhere around there, year teaching. I live in Naperville, but teach in Lombard. And I'm also one of the Illinois NEA directors that sit on the NEA Board of Directors in Washington, D.C.
Thanks, Rebecca. And David Goldberg.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is David Goldberg. I teach political science at the College of DuPage. I've been there 16 years and have worked with the IEA in a variety of places. And then most recently in my role as the president of our local College of DuPage Faculty Association, and the proud father of 3 public education graduates who went to Naperville schools, College of DuPage, and are now either graduates of higher education or hopefully graduates soon in the midst of that. Thank you.
There's a lot of subtext in that sentence. We'll leave that there. Let me start with a question for you, Rebecca. In no small part triggered that I had the good pleasure of chatting with your students yesterday. Yes. And, they were a high energy bunch and was a welcome relief. All the other things in my day. We had, a huge part of this Build Back Better bill that we just passed this morning was to deal with early child care. That, the U.S. was the first country to provide universal K-12 education, and lots of other countries followed that, but lots of other countries went beyond, and we haven't provided pre-K education. Now we have universal pre-K. It's going to take a couple of years to phase it in. We got to make sure that we get teachers trained up and supplies. But I wonder if you could just speak sort of, number one, to what sorts of differences in preparedness do you see in students that come in who've had a robust pre-K experience versus those who just didn't have the means to do it? And then separately on the teacher side, since so many teachers are young moms who need pre-K, and that was, a real sort of gap during COVID as a lot of those facilities closed up. What are you seeing as far as like teacher retention and being able to hold on to folks who need those childcare? What more do we need to do federally?
Yeah, well, and first I want to say thank you for joining us yesterday. The students are still talking about it, and they just thought it was great. So thank you. It was I think the highlight of probably was having you visit with us. But yeah, even though I teach 5th grade, you can still see a marked difference between students who have gone through a preschool program or have gotten some sort of, maybe it isn't a formal preschool program, but has gotten some early childhood education as compared to those who don't. When you look as educators, like, we know that it's those children who experience economic insecurity, food insecurity, early in life that really need those programs. They really need that extra little push, that extra little boost. And unfortunately, because of the cost of childcare, those are the parents that can't afford good quality programs, if at all they can find it. And as you said, at the height of the pandemic, we saw how important that was, because some parents had to choose, and parents still have to choose between, do I go to work and pay for childcare, or do I stay home? Because for some parents, they're working solely to pay for that childcare. I have a friend who actually works at the DuPage PADS program, and he was saying that there's a lot of parents who that's their choice. A lot of their clients could get jobs, but they don't have anyone to watch their children. They can't pay for that. And those are the kids that really need this. So that expansion, I think, is really going to help. And it's not just going to help, it helps when they're in, when they're 1, they're 2, they're 3, they're 4, but it really, it's that cumulative effect of they're coming into kindergarten with a base that they can build off from, rather than having to kind of build up to that base. And then looking at our teachers, that has been a huge part of planning for how we were doing remote instruction. Even now, when we talk about quarantining and things like that, like, parents there's a lot of parents who don't have those options, who had to balance teaching at home remotely in a totally new way of teaching, along with, and I have my child with me and I'm trying to take care of them while I'm doing all this and juggling. And we did have some teachers who just said, that's it, I'm done. I can't balance all of this. I can't find quality childcare or the programs that I want. If I'm working, all my money's going to that. And so I would rather just stay home with my child. So I think that there's a lot more, we're going to see a lot more in education, that having to balance between the what do we do. And I think that the expansion of preschool, the expansion of help for families who need the help for childcare is really going to help. Lombard has a great preschool program. We have an award-winning early childhood center, but we're so limited in how many parents we can let in. We've talked about possibly having staff join in, but we're so limited that now we will hopefully have more funding to open that up to more of our community. And that's an exciting thing. As an elementary school teacher, it's a really exciting thing to think that we're going to be able to help even more people in our community. So thank you.
Thank you. I should have said this before. I believe we're on Facebook Live. I'm not very good at all the technology here, but to the extent time allows, we're going to try to answer some questions. So if folks are watching and they've got some questions, throw them in the chat, and we'll try to get to the ones, try to group them somehow. Somebody inside the machine will take care of that. Eric, I want to shift to you at sort of the more collegiate or the high school level. I don't sit on the Education and Labor Committee. And in spite of that, I have lost track of how many conversations we had as a caucus of trying to think through what are we going to do about our education system through the wake of COVID. Both as we were learning about the science of this disease. Should you wear masks? Should you not wear masks? Is it airborne? Is it surfaces? How do we clean things? Do we need to improve HVAC in schools and all that? Do we have the capital to do that? As we went to remote, how do you deal with kids who don't have Wi-Fi at home and don't have a hotspot? And how do we get those resources to kids in need? The folks who depended on free and reduced lunch, well, how the heck are they going to get that if the cafeteria workers aren't there and the kitchens aren't running, and we don't have to do that with COVID? And we we certainly worked very hard to try and provide what federal support we could, obviously in partnership with states and different rolled out. It's not lost on me that a whole lot of teachers and administrators bootstrapped their way through those problems as well and didn't wait around for us to figure out how to do it. But, as we hopefully have this, not fully behind us, but a little bit in the rearview mirror, it's sort of the same question for you as Rebecca. What did we do well? What did we do badly? Where did we sort of, in the Warren Buffettism, when the tide goes out, you find out who's not wearing pants? Where did we expose gaps in our society that we need to be thinking about going forward?
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's a big question. I think with everyone was impacted by this, right? By COVID. So many of us were struggling in so many ways. And the word pivot, became a daily word that we all use. So I think when it came to like the American Rescue Plan money, that was very helpful. That's infused into our systems now. I know my own, and what was, I'll back up a second. What was impactful in each of our districts is the ability to spend that money as the district needs, because where Rebecca's at is different than where I'm at and different than the needs of what David gets, right? So how COD spends that money in Lombard and Glenbard, it's important. I know we used it on social workers, more social workers. And I think getting the hats, we all jumped on board, right? We as whole systems, and I appreciate how you said it early on in this conversation, from the bus drivers to we had bus drivers delivering food to bus stops, right? We had nurses doing wellness checks. We had our deans and administrators going to kids' homes because they weren't showing up on Zoom. We had teachers doing food drives, and then that turned into vaccination drives and all kinds of, getting hotspots to kids. So there's definitely collectively, we've all done a whole lot of great stuff. I think moving forward, what's really a spotlight has shown on mental health issues. And actually I was wearing, I think I can tilt this down, the Here For You t-shirt. So we have a Students Against Destructive Decisions club at Glenbard North, and this is a 3-year-old t-shirt. So this isn't from COVID. And this is mental health awareness. We're here for you. That's our message. How can we help you? And I think, so the mental health issues have been there. I think much of our system, the educational system, have done their best to address them, but I think the spotlight has shone on that. And even for educators, again, everyone's struggling. The kids are our number one priority by far, but the statement, it holds true. If I don't take care of myself, I won't be able to take care of my students. So I think moving forward, the social workers, mental health programs, for many of us, including the educators, I think that's going to be a key issue that's going to continue to be addressed.
David, pivoting to you, and this is one where full disclosure, I have less to offer. We did throw a lot of money at the American Rescue Plan to help out schools. We did just pass this really cool thing for not just for universal pre-K, but child care tax credit expansions to make sure that folks can afford for outside sources. Full disclosure, we were really trying to get 2 years of community college in the package as well. We had that in the version that we were working on in the House, and unfortunately, we just couldn't quite get that through the Senate, and we got to figure out how to go back and do that. But as someone who lives in that community college environment, and man, are we lucky to have COD in our district. The resources that you guys provide. I lost track of how many times I went to see Frida Kahlo at the back. But how do you guys think about, we've just got this ongoing problem that college tuition keeps growing faster than inflation, than wage growth. What are you seeing, how are students getting through this? CUD is a wonderful school, but you don't have Harvard's endowment. How are you grappling with that, and what can and should we be doing better on that front?
That's a great question, and I appreciate it. I think the opening is appreciation for what Congress and the White House have done in terms of the rescue plan and other forms of federal aid that really helped and were needed and on time, that helped with areas like Pell Grants. Then the expansion of that to include a different tier of people. And that also then includes some of the things that Rebecca and Erica mentioned in terms of making sure to reach out to students and community members that we usually have good contact with, that it's harder to maintain that. So I think the obvious piece, the obvious story that is unfortunately a real story for me, is at the very start when this happened, I had a student who was a good student in a political science class who was engaged and kept up and was doing good work, and she didn't have a place to live. And so with that meant that she was trying to work her cell phone and try to make that happen. And was unable to go forward. And that was at the very beginning, before some of this aid at the federal and then at our level as well hit the pipeline, and was unable to move forward. And I tried very hard to keep in touch with her. And thankfully now she's finishing up this class a year and a half later. But in the meantime, I just worry. You just worry about students and how they're able to cope with this. And that's kind of a real story, a practical one. I think the more regular occurrences are students that when we're doing a Zoom class and you have a traditional age college student for us, 18 to 21, 18 to 25, who is at home and then basically competing with 3 to 5 other family members for Wi-Fi. So then the connection is not going to be ideal. It's not going to enable us to have engagement, right? Which is really important. And being able to engage with students, and when everyone has their camera off, because they have to be mindful of resources because of the cost. Back to what was mentioned earlier in terms of having to make decisions between, my boss asked me to work a shift, and so I can't make your final exam. I can't turn that paper in when it's due. Can you work with me, right? And I think those are really heartbreaking stories. And I think most faculty that I talk to at College of DuPage, and I assume lots of places, are very happy to work and are empathetic and try to create on the fly the opportunities to help students be successful. But again, that's at a more higher level than even the question of, can they afford tuition for next year? So the fact that the second round of funding was wider and allowed for funding for some of these things that we're talking about, for transportation, for rent, for hotspots that the college has actually been good at recently, are those kinds of just existential issues that have been so problematic and highlighted that. And I don't wish to restate the Warren Buffett example that you gave, but I think what we see with much as it is appreciated and so helpful, it also calls attention to, I went to a board meeting last night at my school. We're talking about 5 years out in terms of expenditures and revenue streams and what that's going to look like. And so what we see with respect to that is that disparity is worse, and it highlights those structural problems in terms of funding for education. And thankfully, we live in a district that historically has been affluent, and we know that there is a rise of poverty in our district. And the problems that are associated with that. So this is a real problem that is even more likely to be an issue going forward, even as numbers come down and booster shots go forward, that there's still unmasked, if you will, this version of how difficult that is for students going forward. I think people are just a lot more conscious of it. And while the funding is excellent and on time and very much appreciated, it also highlights the issues that students are facing with, the traditional college age students are facing with, not even getting into childcare issues, not even getting into the more complicated issues that are so obvious for people in their day-to-day existence.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, we've spent, there's some significant resources in Build Back Better for expanding, try to actually get to coast, everybody has access to broadband. That I think we've all realized how urgent that is in this moment. And that's been Jim Clyburn from South Carolina, the majority whip, has been really the loudest advocate for that. And he represents some pretty poor folks. But it's not lost on anybody that your connection just got a little choppy when you were just talking there, in spite of us living in a pretty affluent district. And I can tell you that there's an unnamed member of Congress in Illinois 6th District who one time got bumped off an MSNBC interview because both of his daughters were doing their Wi-Fi at the same time, right? And that's happened in a place where we've got pretty good access. I want to turn over to your questions, but not before putting a real meaty question out to all of you. And you can either all answer this or not answer this, but I want to give you an opportunity to talk about it. Nationally, maybe even globally, we're in a time of just tremendous transition and dislocation. We've got historic records of levels of wealth inequality, political polarization, COVID. You all are on the front lines. I was a biochem major as an undergrad, and that means I had to spend a lot on textbooks because you're always learning where there was a mistake in the old textbook and updating it. And we don't think twice about that if it's a biology textbook or a chemistry textbook. But when we find there was a mistake in our history textbook and we update that, it becomes very contentious. And I was reading before you got on the call, David. I was reading this beautiful piece from James Baldwin in 1963. At a similar moment of tension, particularly for a homosexual Black man. And he wrote, "The paradox of education is this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated, to ask questions of the universe, and then learn to live with those questions as the way he achieves his own identity. But no society is really anxious to have that kind of person around. What a society wants is a citizenry who will obey the rules of society. But if a society succeeds with this, it is about to perish." And I think there's just this beautiful observation of society doesn't work unless we all have a certain set of rules, but you all are in the job of educating people to question and to be broader. And that's a big, meaty question, but it resonates so much with so many of the high profile things in our society right now. I just didn't want to end without giving you a chance to share what you wish people understood about the talent of being an educator and the challenge of being an educator, and how you think about balancing that paradox.
I think that Baldwin quote, if I may, is really eloquent and captures this from multiple perspectives. The structural issues, again, that are unmasked by this. I mean, I think in general, before COVID, I always felt like on a good day, if we're doing our job well, we're raising more questions and there are fewer answers. And the more that students have an understanding, again, in a good semester, when students are beginning to sort of grasp at the scope of some of these issues, then they're raising more questions and understanding both linkages in terms of the problems, the obstacles that lay in front of people, but also the possibilities when people are working together and what that potentially looks like. I think the specific things that you mentioned in terms of an income gap, for sure, when we talk about access to healthcare, when we talk about maternity leave, which is always an issue at our school, that at times those can feel daunting and overwhelming. And I think that's definitely the climate in which we live, that for faculty and students on our end, that sort of get caught up and then feel submerged again in the enormity of some of these issues. And that's a constant struggle, even for the best, even for the strongest, smartest, brightest folks that are taking on these challenges. So I feel like we are in the midst of beginning to have a conversation as an institution about what we learned, about the future of learning, is what our task force is, and how to do that better. And I'm not sure we even have the right questions yet. So this is a process, and engaging with students in a way where they feel comfortable to share, I think is key, right? Like I said, when we're on Zoom and someone can't turn the camera on, or my unironic attempt where I had a burp and a hiccup, in my Wi-Fi access at that moment, that being able to create that kind of connection that's necessary for people to feel a part of a larger community and to be able to get their hands around some of these challenges is a real challenge for all of us in terms of education, but also feeling a part of a larger community is what makes these things seem more manageable is not the right word, but to make them feel a common understanding of the challenges that lie in front of us every day and the difficulty associated with that.
I want to make sure that you guys get some chance to ask questions. And again, for those folks watching, throw some questions in the chat. But Eric and I have had this conversation before, that I sometimes think that in getting into this political line of work of mine, I've learned what it means to be either a teacher or a Cubs manager, in the sense that the less experience one has in those professions, the more people feel qualified to tell you how to do your job better. and I would just ask everybody out there listening and thinking about their own school districts to appreciate how hard that challenge is that you talk about, and how long you have worked to develop the expertise to answer that question that would be hard for anybody, but even more so if you didn't have the experience. Before we open up to whoever's on Facebook, anything I can answer for the three of you?
I'll go first if that's good. I do have a question. And to speak just real briefly to the Baldwin quote you used, I think at the high school level, our challenge has been to get students to engage with each other and this has been going on for 5 to 10 years. Like I said, I'm a social studies teacher. I teach a lot of government classes, and many of us teachers have this conversation, is how to have a good, healthy conversation. That's not an argument, or that's not a tweet. Tweets have their moments here and there, but to have good, healthy dialogue, agree to disagree, that kind of stuff has been an interesting challenge. But now I'm going to shift to a different challenge. And in regards to the Build Back Better Act that luckily passed the House, and we'll see how it keeps moving. We've definitely heard, even pre-pandemic, we've heard things regarding the teacher shortage. I think in our area, DuPage County, we work at some very reputable places. We got teacher applications like crazy, but we're starting to see a sub shortage, a teacher's aide shortage, and even some of the key, like an Italian teacher and some of the specialties are getting difficult to fill. So is there anything in that? And then is there anything in the Build Back Better Act to assist in teacher training, teacher retention, teacher recruitment, and even in regards to diversity? I think we're all, the three of us are members of the Illinois Education Association and the larger National Education Association. And we've definitely put a focus on, our diverse teaching population and the positive impact that has on our students. So that was a loaded question for you.
So the answer is yes, and I'm going to respond more qualitatively than quantitatively, because off the top of my head I don't know the numbers involved, but there are specific grants for these grow your own programs, which I think is the acronym, and the idea of those is specifically to address for teacher shortages, specifically to focus towards the high need subject areas where there are gaps, and with a very explicit focus on trying to find teachers in the communities they serve, so that when kids are looking and seeing mentors, they see somebody who looks like them, talks like them, someone from the community to the extent we can, which should hopefully address some of the diversity issues. Is that sufficient? I don't know. I think we've always had this challenge, as you all know well, that the wealthier the community, the bigger the tax base, and the easier it is to recruit and retain the caliber of teachers that we want to have. And I'm fortunate to represent a lot of those communities. I live in this community because we moved here for the caliber of the schools. But it's not lost on me that even in this community, teacher retention is a hard issue. So yes, we've tried to, and I think let's talk in a year or so and see if what we did was sufficient.
Great, thanks.
Rebecca or David, anything on your mind?
I can go. One of the things that we found very successful in supporting our community during the pandemic, when kids weren't coming to school in person, was the ability to have lunches, breakfasts for our community, no cost, come pick them up, because it was, like Erica said, like bus drivers were taking food around. It's been great. As educators, we know like hungry kids can't eat, or hungry kids can't learn. I know when I'm in a meeting late in the day, that's what I'm thinking about. Like, oh, it's been so long since I ate. I can't even imagine being a child in school doing that. And I know this year we still have some of that benefit going on, but in the Build Back Better bill, it's been a long week. In the Build Back Better bill, what kinds of supports are there for child nutrition, school lunches, things like that?
So I just want to first thank, I lost track of how many sort of pop-up food pantries I went to over the course of COVID and that surge. I remember going to one up in Glendale where it started at 9 and cars started lining up at 5 in the morning, just like the number of people who were all of a sudden on the bubble when unemployment was going through the roof. And an awful lot of those places I went to were in schools that had repurposed their existing free lunch program, and schools and communities and, and the parents and all the PTA folks who got together and said, you know what, let's just get lunch out to anybody who needs it and not spend time trying to figure out if you're a student. So thank you. Like the number of lives that were just made easier for what so many schools did. Thank you so much for that. We do have programs in the Build Back Better. I think the numbers on it, the estimate is that it's an expansion of the free school meal program to about 9 million more children that are currently covered. And to also do it in the summer program that I think it's called the summer EBT. Help me out on the acronym. Something benefit transfer, electronic benefit transfer. It's the summer food program, whatever that is, to get it out so that we can keep expanding those through. And I must say, it's been one of the things that I take just great pride in. When we did that expanded child tax credit, child poverty fell by 40%. Like, how many things do you get to do in this life where you can say that you made that much of an impact in folks' lives? And, and talking to folks some of the folks who were in those food pantry lines, and I got to choose between rent and meals and diapers, and all of a sudden I don't have to make the choice. So number one, the food benefit program, but also continuing that child tax credit going forward so that folks cannot have to make those horrible choices and have a little more personal freedom. David, anything on your mind before we go to the audience?
I apologize. I appreciate that and your patience. And that having to make difficult choices is a part of this. We've all mentioned in this conversation mental health, but I wanted to sort of put a focus on that about even before COVID. I think as a nation, we were sort of grappling with how to have an honest conversation about how mental health issues should be treated. And that's definitely the case when it comes to higher education. So since the pandemic, I would say that a whole number of faculty have noticed a significant number, that there's been a big increase, in terms of the number of students that are struggling to keep up academically. Many students and faculty definitely feel overwhelmed and are less able to keep up. Students who regularly keep up, in part with their classes, are not really able to turn in the work that is required, and are disappearing, as was mentioned earlier. Like good students that I have interacted with before that are they reach out to repeatedly and have a lot of things going on in their lives, and how that makes people feel. I think as an institution, and in general, higher education has not made that as much of a priority. So what I'm asking is, this issue is likely to increase in the coming semesters for all of us, and we need to have a conversation recognizing at the federal and state and local levels, as well as a commitment to back mental health in higher education. So that means hiring more counselors, and more counselors that are particularly qualified in mental health, but also making faculty and everyone else available as appropriate and as qualified to sort of have that conversation. So I'd like to just see more of a commitment and address kind of that issue around this gap in higher education stress that students more and more are dealing with, especially during this environment. Thank you.
Yeah, so we definitely, there were a number of provisions in the Build Back Better. One is more funding for the suicide prevention helplines that I think is probably more, through NAMI and some of the, at least locally, some of those groups. There's also a program that's included there, Project Aware, and I'm actually curious, Erica, if that's connected to some of the stuff that you were talking about, but it's specifically to increase awareness of mental health issues around school age kids, and I'm curious if your T-shirt is tied with any of those programs. It's an existing program.
No, yeah, I haven't heard of that particular program, but yeah, I know there's a lot of options out there in our area, but it's definitely an area, I would agree with David, that can't be over-serviced.
Yeah. I mean, I must say, and I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about this in any stretch, but with two teenage daughters, I'm just amazed at the way that they talk about. They're so much more mature in talking about mental health issues than I was when I was their age. I won't repeat the kind of words we used to describe kids, when I was on the playground, because they'll get in trouble on the news if I say that. But there was just this total like unawareness of mental health as being something that was actually a health condition, as opposed to something that's like you just chose to be a weird kid, right? And I'm just like I said, I'm so impressed by like the youth on this are so much more conscious of it and talking about it in ways that wasn't the case when I was younger.
Right, especially, and the stigma has a little bit more removed. Students are, so at the high school level, at least, they're so much more likely to express their issues and be willing to share. And, oh yeah, I go to the social worker, or oh yeah, I go to the school psychologist, which is a great step. And again, we need the service, they're willing to get the services. So we need to make sure we've got the services.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks. So I know we've got a little bit of time left, and I see that Amanda from my office is on. Amanda, are you going to read some of the questions and call them through? I've got some scraps of paper. People are on my desk, but I didn't know if you were going to read them or if you want me just to sort of go through some of the ones that are here.
I believe that Jacob is going to handle sending over the Facebook comments.
Okay.
So,
all right. Well, I'll take it. Jacob just threw some paper on my desk, so maybe I'll throw some out and we'll go from here. Gina says, "Do you support school choice?" And I gather that's directed at me, but let me start and then I'll let you guys chime in. One of the things that, and I think there's a direct parallel to this conversation we just had about broadband. We took a decision in our country back in the 30s and 40s that we were going to be the leader of the free world by making sure that everybody had access to a K through 12 education. And so we created a public school system. I mean, prior to that point, we had total school choice, right? If you decided to educate your kids, you did. If you didn't have money to educate your kids, maybe you sent them to a factory, but there was choice and there was ability to pay, and those things were stapled together. And we took a decision to make sure that every kid would have access to a public education, not just only those that could pay. And within that was a decision to, this is sometimes is a dirty word politically, but to cross-subsidize a little bit, because you can't just pay for the education on an a la carte basis and expect to get a good education. And we became the envy of the world by virtue of doing that. We still had choice within that context. Some people chose to go to parochial schools. Some people chose to go to, the Exeters and Andovers and those private schools. Some people chose to be homeschooled. So you weren't compelled to go through the public education, but we made sure that resource was there. And the reason I say there's an analog to broadband is that we have basically decided to give people access to broadband in this country only if they can choose to pay for it. And so now as our education system in this last year has depended so much on people having access to broadband, to some degree, we're relearning our history. And so I think we still have we still like choice, we still like competition, but we do still have a system where we say we need to make sure that some of the best decisions that you ever make in this life are who to be born to as your parents. And you didn't make that decision, but it sets up the trajectory of your life. And we need to make sure that we provide enough of a system that while you may make choices into that system, we've got a good and healthy and robust and world-beating public education system that's available for everybody. I don't know if you all want to chime in or add anything else to that or go to the next question.
I think from a political science perspective, if I may, public education, as you pointed out, is a collective good that everyone benefits from, and it leads to political stability. And there are a lot of benefits to that that can be measured that are positive for society as a whole. And so I think attempts to starve some districts and some communities at the expense of others comes at a very high price. And I think we're beginning to see that. I also think it's not a coincidence when I talk about this with students in a particular concept in a book about how at the end of the day, people are coming, the higher education system is the envy of the world. And it's not a coincidence that that decision that you described that was made 80 some odd years ago, it contributes to that. It contributes to the social attraction of higher education in the United States. And so an attempt to do anything other than to support that, rethink what's best, of course, but to support it, I think comes at a very high price. And we see some of that price when it comes to increasing polarization and divisiveness in terms of our public good and conversations about issues that are important to everybody.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. One of the things that we were talking about in what became the Build Back Better was that while we were the first country to provide universal K through 12, other countries followed, and a lot of those countries expanded beyond that level. And they said, we're going to do pre-K as well as part of the bargain. We're going to do, post, secondary education as well as part of the bargain. And as we now sit here in a world where, on a lot of metrics, our people don't come out of the U.S. education system as educated as people in those other countries. When do we start rethinking sort of that bargain and expanding? And that was the idea behind trying to expand community college and pre-K in the package. Second question, interesting question from Stephen, which I would put to you all. You'll be smarter than this. He says, how about getting more men in schools as teachers? Given the conversation we were saying before about we want to make sure that students see somebody who looks like them and feels like them, not just in terms of race and everything else, but in terms of gender as well. How do you guys think about that question?
I can start with that. Yeah, I think that a lot of times when we talk about students seeing people who reflect them, we immediately think about race. But I think that especially at elementary education, having male teachers is it's huge. I know that at our school, we have a kindergarten teacher, a male kindergarten teacher, a male PE teacher, a male third grade or fourth grade teacher, and a male fifth grade teacher. And it sometimes I get a little disappointed because, Mr. Melton next to me sometimes is, he's the teacher that everyone wants because it's such a unique thing at elementary school to have a male teacher, and he is great. So, they have a great time in there. But I think that it brings a different perspective too to education. I know that there's times that we have team meetings and we'll talk and he'll chime in and be like, well, did you think about it like this? Like it adds to me as a teacher, and it lets kids have just another person that they can see as, oh, I could be that. Like I actually am starting to see some elementary boys who are like, I want to be a teacher, which really that hasn't happened for a while. Like usually it's the girls who are like, I'm going to be a teacher. And so I think that that's just when we talk about the teacher shortage and things like that. Yeah, I think that is definitely an area that we still have to work on because it's a predominantly female profession.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll leave, and I think we're nearing the end of our time, but maybe just offer an observation on that, and then I'm going to leave. I'm going to say this very carefully because we actually have legit teachers on the phone, and I'm just a dude who reads books from time to time. So you will correct me if I get some of this wrong, but there's this fascinating history of the United States, through the 20s, 30s, 40s, that we had all these changes going on in our society. It was the rise of the progressive era, and the response to the Gilded Age and all the parallels that is to the moment we're in right now. We of course had World War I and World War II as bookends of that period. But at the same time that we were taking a decision to provide universal K through 12 education, the it was a job that had previously been done largely by women at home. And so there was nothing threatening to men about women coming in and doing that job because it was already seen as women's work to do, right? And the reason I mentioned the threat is that then you had World War II, a bunch of men went off to war, a bunch of women went to the factories, remember Rosie the Riveter. And when the men came home, that was perceived as a little bit more threatening. And there was this sort of backlash against that. And how much of like the moment we have right now, you know, in answer to this question about men in schools, is that we had the rise of women in the workforce corresponding to the rise of K through 12 education. And we're still dealing with the ramifications of things we sort of assign gender roles based on that history, and don't even get started on the racial side of that, because there are jobs that we only thought of as African-American jobs, like working in the fields, because of the jobs that they were having, right, when that went through, and being nannies, right? And we may think we're beyond that history, but it's not that far away. And what was that? George Santayana, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. So thank you for teaching us a little history. And now before I leave, what did I get wrong? Because you guys, there's a poli-sci teacher, there's a social studies teacher. Do I have that broadly right? Please correct me before I go, so we don't leave anybody less educated than when they started this little event.
I'd say you did a very nice brief history of the United States. Well done. And, you know, I would just encourage what you said too, puts it in a very interesting perspective. And I think along with what Rebecca had said, you know, I think at the high school level and the college level, you start to get more men in there. But it's this idea of uplifting the field of education as a profession. You know, we need to look at it differently. I had a student teacher last semester, and the supervising teacher from the college kept referring to me as a professional educator in all her emails and as she spoke with me. And I'm like, yeah, that's, I can't believe I've never been really called that before, but I'm a professional educator. I think in my district, 80% of us have a master's degree. It is a profession, it's a calling, there's a love of it, but it's also a profession that just needs to get uplifted and promoted, so we can get more people in here to do more good things for more kids.
Terrific. Well, I'm glad to know that I hopefully I earned a credit in social studies today.
In the Cliff Notes version of social studies.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was not full semester credit.
Right.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. Thanks to everybody who's watching. And again, to close where we started, it is American Educators Week. Thank an educator, especially after this year. You are deeply appreciated for all you do, not the least of which was taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Thanks, Erica. Thank you, David. Thank you, Rebecca. Be well, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.